All right. I'm just finishing a book on this. I mean, it's really how computers affect us, how our online lives affect us, and so yeah. So it's been a very long labor, and because so much has been written about it. And the thing is that every time I feel ready to submit, there's another awesome research. And but I had to let it go because I signed, I had an agreement not to submit it. So yeah, so everything's good, and it's going to be published by Routledge in about 14 weeks. Yeah, well, I've been working on it for a long time, and so I'm doing that, and I'm doing with another student, with a graduate student. What I'm doing now is a research on. It's kind of complicated. I'm using a social psychological theory on the need for recognition. And what we're doing is to analyze websites from alt-right and all those fascist movements to because my hunch is that a lot of the anger and a lot of the outrage and a lot of the negative emotions are based on that denial of recognition in a way. I'm not excusing anything, but I'm just saying this is not coming out of nowhere, and I'm trying to see whether. And we've started, so we've analyzed already one website just to get our feet wet and see what's there. And so, yeah, there are a number of key emotions which are present, which we see a lot. So we calculate like what are the words which are mentioned the most, for example, and what are the emotions that they pertain to. So when I was a grad student, I worked with a famous professor for whom shame was the most lethal emotion, especially unrecognized, unacknowledged shame. And for him, it's like the most lethal emotion, and even at the national level. And he tries to explain World War One. I mean, he goes too far, but he tries to explain World War One and World War Two by analyzing speeches and newspapers. And he also looks at those key words that all indicate shame, but at the national level. So I'm doing it on a more group level, like political movements. But that is interesting recognition about with the social media and your get likes and how you think about that. Now that things like YouTube, people become celebrity. Like I could be, a celebrity. I'm just a person, but in my own YouTube channel or whatever. Exactly. There is the great book called The Filter Bubble, and actually President Obama, in his farewell speech, he said that like there are three like main crises that we face, and the third one was the filter bubble, meaning that we all live in our own echo chamber that makes us feel very good about ourselves. So there is that research on like now we are in the stage of Web 3.0, which started on December 4, 2009. We entered the third phase of the internet revolution. It's Web 3.0, and Web 3.0, one characteristic of it is that it's becoming increasingly perfectly personalized. So that Web 2.0 is more you go and seek the information. Web 3.0, the information finds you. And no, because I'm still reading, because I'm still writing about it, and so and there's that new concept of brain jacking also, Like Nicholas Carr just wrote a piece in the Atlantic on. He's very famous. He wrote the book called The Shallows, which is really what the internet does to our brain. And he just wrote that incredible piece about this is what the industry is doing right now. They say it's a race down the brainstem. What makes you, and just you, what makes you tick. Yeah, it's to me, it's yeah, yeah. My wife is a teacher too, and the school is so proud because they got 200 no iPads. But my wife grew up in law school. She said no, they have to play with sand and soil and water and yeah. No, there's another research that shows that even among grad students and adults, so you take a group of students, they're equal cognitively, you place them into two groups and you ask them to perform some cognitive task. One group has no cell phone, no iPad, nothing. The other group has a cell phone on the table, but it's not on. The mere presence of that cell phone is going to decrease their performance just because it's there. But also in class, I always tell my students no iPhone because research also shows that if there are 20 students in class, one is looking at his or her cell phone, everybody suffers because suddenly his focus or her focus is on something else. The other ones, the other students, even though those who are trying to be nice, their concentration is also going to be affected by the near presence of a cell phone or someone looking at it. So yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, yeah, but and yeah, and nobody knows. Like nobody really knows long term what it does. It's like, but absolutely, yeah. And what happens when you completely disconnect? Because there are those experiments too. Actually, my graduate student, uh, when he was at Cal State, then he was part of a team. They did a research with like 400 students who completely disconnected for a week. And then there was a large team, and so everybody measured something else. So that's interesting too. And there's that suggestion that you have technology Sabbath, meaning Saturday and Sunday. And I mean, I do. I'm trying to really disconnect. And my gosh, it's wonderful. It's very nice. It's very nice. Yeah, 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 yeah. And nothing catastrophic or urgent is going to happen. Yeah, but that's how we're leashed. There's always this belief that, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss something. FOMO is called fear of missing out. Yes. Okay. Okay. So should we wait? Okay. Sure. Okay. Is it still morning? Yeah, it's still morning. So did you start recording? Okay. All right. Well, good morning and thank you for coming. My name is Simon Gottschalk, and I'm a professor of sociology here at UNLV, and I specialize in social psychology. And so the workshop today is inspired by my research and by scholarship in social psychology. But at the same time, I'm also a partner in a small company called CI Works, and CI stands for Communication Intelligence. And basically what we do with our company is that we go to professional organizations, we study communication problems, and then we engage participants in videotaped recording of simulations. And then we study communication patterns and we try to help people improve how they communicate in order for them to get their objective. And our company is very much informed by the book Social Intelligence, which was produced in 2006. It became immediately an international bestseller. But social intelligence is really summarizing a new science, a new development in psychology and sociology, such as you can see, neurosociology, social neuroscience, in a new approach to the mind, a new approach to the effect that people have on each other at a neural level. So we found it fascinating, the members of my company, and we decided to start a company based on the findings of social neuroscience. And social intelligence basically has two basic dimensions. One, as you can see, is social awareness, and one is social facility. Now, social awareness, interestingly, are aptitudes, such as primal empathy, empathic accuracy, attunement, social cognition. Those are mental skills, those are empathic skills, emotional skills, those are aptitudes. On the right-hand column, social facility refers to actual behaviors. So synchrony, for example, is the ability, so when you're in a focused conversation with someone, synchrony refers to a phenomenon that we perform unconsciously whereby our facial gestures and our body movements start to mimic the other. And that facilitates communication. Right? Influence is the ability to guide the outcome of an interaction. So self-presentation is the ability to present oneself successfully. Concern is to care about other people's needs. So what's interesting is that the left-hand column are aptitudes, the right-hand columns refer to behaviors. And of course, the key is to translate those aptitudes into behaviors, because if you have aptitudes but you don't translate them into behaviors, so we're not moving ahead. But when you look also at those components of social intelligence, what is interesting is that all those refer to communication skills. Meaning empathic accuracy, for example, is the ability to understand the other person's motivations and intentions and emotions. Social cognition is the ability to understand what people want, the operating rules in a particular environment. Synchrony, again, is the ability to mimic unconsciously the other behavior. Self-presentation is the ability to present oneself effectively, but that is too communication. So it is interesting for us, if you will, that 7 out of the 8 components of social intelligence in the end refer to communicational aptitudes. Now, what I want to do is first to present a very short approach to a sociological approach to communication. Then I want to talk a little bit about face-to-face communication, especially the channels that we use, the challenges that we meet, and some suggestions on how to perfect interpersonal communication at the face-to-face level. And then I want to talk about computer-mediated communication, same thing, some of the challenges that we meet, and some suggestions on how to perfect our online communication. And I'm paying attention to both kinds of communication because we know that face-to-face communication and online communication or computer-mediated communication influence each other. Meaning, again, if we're all members of a discussion list all together, and if I diss you online publicly, needless to say, the next time we meet, you're going to be mad at me. So my behavior, my communicational behavior with you online is going to affect our communication when we meet face-to-face and vice versa. And as I will show in a moment, so much of our communication today is computer mediated, that any talk about interpersonal communication, in my modest opinion, should include a section on computer mediated communication. All right, so let me start with a very brief sociological overview on communication. So when you think about it, when you are in the presence of another, we always communicate. And I use the word communicate and interact interchangeably, right? An interaction is an action which is oriented towards another. So when we are in the presence of another, we always communicate. we cannot help but communicate. So if I'm waiting for the bus on Maryland Parkway and another person approaches the bus stop, there's a million things I can do. But I can say, it's nice today. Or I can say, number 28 is late again. Or I can turn away and pretend I don't see that person, but I'm still communicating. So when we are in the presence of another, we always communicate. We establish ourselves through our communicative acts. We establish who we are through how we communicate. And I will develop that in a moment. Similarly, we establish our relations with other people through how we communicate with them. 3, all communicative acts, all communication is always motivated. Whether I'm conscious of it or not, but all communicative acts are motivated. They all seek to reach a particular objective. All communications, even the most trivial, has the power to do one of 3 things. Either maintain the status quo, or bring people together, or drive them further apart. All communicative acts will have those results. And when you think about it, except for the physical realm, our most gratifying pleasures and our most agonizing pains result from communicative acts. A frown that you got, or a scoff, or someone turning away from you, or you said, I love you to someone and that person does not answer, or a silence that was not expected, or a growl. Right? So except for the physical realm, when you think about it, what pleases us the most, what brings us the most joy, and what brings us the most pain are communicative acts. All right, so let's talk a little bit about face-to-face communication, and especially the channels of communication, because I've said all those things about communication, and you're wondering, well, what does it mean? Well, according to some theory, we communicate through 10 different channels. The first one is, of course, language. Right? The words that we use and the words that we write. So that's easy. We communicate through language. But we also communicate through paralanguage. Anybody knows what is paralanguage? Paralanguage is not what we say, but how we say. The stress, the volume, the pitch, the intonation, the silences. Okay, we also communicate through paralanguage, and when 2 people have a conversation, about 90% of what they retain is not what people have said, but it's how they've communicated. So we also communicate through that medium. And you know as well as I do that I can tell you the same sentence, but depending on my voice, depending on my tone, that very same sentence can have completely different meanings. Okay, we also communicate through sounds. We say, we moan, we groan, we sigh, we whistle, we exhale loudly, but we also communicate when we use those sounds. We communicate through facial gestures. The human face has 54 muscles, which is capable of about 250,000 different expressions, only 8 of which have universal recognition. Okay, but we also communicate through those. There are about 18 different kinds of smiles. We communicate through the gaze also. As Dostoevsky said in The Brother Karamazov, it is worse to look through someone than to look in a mean way at someone. Because if I look in a mean way at you, I give you the skunk eye, at least I acknowledge your existence. But if I look through you, it's like you don't exist. So I'd rather you acknowledge my existence, even if you don't like me very much, rather than pretend that I don't exist. So we also communicate through facial gestures. And of course, no one is born knowing this, except for the 6 or 8 expressions. We tell babies, don't stare, it's impolite, for example. Well, we assign a particular meaning to particular kinds of gazes. And of course, those are culturally specific. But so we also communicate through facial gestures. Paul Ekman is the grand guru of the analysis of facial gestures, and the FBI, the CIA, and other government agencies are recruiting his services in order to detect individuals who may be dangerous at airports, etc. And of course, today, the analysis of facial gesture has become enormously more scientific than it used to be, right? Today, we can calculate pretty much everything in facial gestures. Okay, those are other examples of almost universal facial gesture. Like when you blush, it means that you're embarrassed. You can't control it. Okay, you're going to communicate your embarrassment. If you're interested, there is that great site. It's called the Face Training. And it's a site in order to train individuals to recognize what we call macro expressions. Macro expressions are those very, very fleeting, very rapid expressions in other people's faces that we don't even realize that we have seen, but they still affect us. Okay, so if you go to that website, you can take the test. Typically, the first time you take the test, you're going to score around 50% because you don't really know what you're looking for. The second time you take the test, chances are you're going to increase your performance to about 80%. Okay, it's a very interesting exercise. Then, of course, we communicate through kinesics, which is body movement. We communicate with our bodies. We cross our arm, we spread our legs, we spread our bodies, etc. And today also, there are very scientific measures to assess a person's body movements. We also communicate, yes, all those are gestures that you recognize, right? This is if you travel overseas, don't use American gestures because it may mean something very rude or something very different. Like the raised finger. Okay, what does that mean? As a simple physical gesture, right? Exactly, this is what you do to a child. It is very condescending, right? It communicates a particular relation that you're having with that person if you raise your finger like that, right? This is the first presidential debate in 2008. Look at how they sit, Obama and Clinton. Remember when Obama got chastised because he bowed too low when he went to Japan? And yes, of course, Trump's handshakes are very well known and very much researched and very much analyzed in the media. Okay, so we also communicate through kinesics. We communicate through haptics, meaning touching, right? Some animals, of course, touch in order to communicate, but of course, humans touch also in all kinds of contexts. And you know as well as I do that where you touch the other person, in what context, with for how long, with what kind of pressure, on what part of the body, all those communicate. Right? And sometimes this very same touch can be completely appropriate. At the gym, for example, if a woman, my trainer is touching my stomach, that's appropriate, but not in the classroom. Right? All touch also communicates. It communicates something about our relationships. People in superior positions typically take the right to touch individuals in subordinate positions, but not the other way around. Right? So touching is also associated with power. Gazing also is associated with power. We also communicate through proxemics, the manipulation of space. Right? So sometimes when you go to the library, you see a desk with 4 chairs, and you put your coat on one chair, you put your backpack on another. And by manipulating that space in that way, basically you communicate to other people. Please don't sit here. If you have a choice, I'd rather be alone. Right? And again, in the West, for example, we know that we feel comfortable when people stand at particular distances from us. So if I don't really know you, I'm expecting you to be at a certain distance from me. If I know you a little bit better, you can come closer. And then there is intimate distance. Of course, those distances are completely different in other societies. So for example, in the Middle East, even when you don't know someone, you're expected to stand really close to that person. And if you don't believe me, next time you have a conversation with someone you don't know, violate that space and see what happens. Right? My bet is that the person is going to move backward to reestablish, without thinking, to reestablish the proper amount of space. And it's not only violate the space, but I would also suggest that how you violate the space. Do you move gently? Do you move softly? Do you move quickly? And regardless of how you violate that space, you're still communicating something about you and something about your relationship. And so even we know that how people sit, different seating arrangements will be more or less conducive to different tasks. So if you want to make decisions, particular seating arrangements will be more conducive than if you want to brainstorm, for example. And actually, it's so interesting. It is when you consider all 10 channels of communication, I'm not done yet, but when you consider all 10 channels of communication, there's so much going on. When you take into consideration kinesics and proxemics and facial gesture and paralanguage and language, there's so much going on that it's impossible to observe 3 people in conversation and get it all. There's too much data flowing from one person to the next. Okay, we also communicate through the manipulation of time. So if you send me an email that says urgent with 3 red flags and I wait a week before answering you, I've communicated. Right? I also manipulate time as a form of communication. We also communicate through objects. The clothes that we wear, what we display in our home. Right? Nothing is random, meaning we display particular objects in our home in order also to communicate something about who we are. we live in a free society. That means that you can dress up any way you want. But every day you decide to dress in a particular way in order also to communicate something about this is who I am. Because you have choice, nothing is random. You've made particular decisions. Right? The objects that we give, the objects that we exchange, also communicate. The objects that we carry on us communicate. We also communicate through actions. Meaning if we're having a phone conversation and I slam the phone, I've communicated. If I walk to the library and you walking behind me and I hold the door open for you, I've communicated. If I choose not to open the door for you, I still have communicated to you. Right? So we communicate through those 10 channels of communication. And what is fascinating is that it is impossible for a person to perfectly control all 10 channels. I mean, it is impossible for me to control exactly what I'm saying, while at the same time perfectly controlling my paralanguage, perfectly controlling my facial gesture, etc. There's too much going on. So some of the challenges of interpersonal communication, there are many, of course. But according to Goffman, who's a very famous sociologist, part of our communications always escapes our control. There's always more leakage. We always communicate more than we know. What we do with our hands, what we do with our face, what we do with our bodies. We always communicate more than we know, more than we can control. They are what we call the impressions that we give and the impressions that we give off. The impressions that we give is the impression that I'm trying to make on you, but that's the impression that I can control. But there's always impressions that I give off, that you get from me out of all the communication that I cannot control. And of course, sometimes they contradict each other. But if I'm saying, I'm really glad to see you, but I do this with my arms, I'm sending you a mixed message. Because my voice is saying, I'm very glad to see you, but my arms are showing, no, I'm not, because I'm protecting myself. Okay. So, and I couldn't resist, this is translated from a French poem, and this is just about communication between two people, even two people who know each other very well. So when you consider what I think, what I want to say, what I think I'm saying, what I'm really saying, what you want to hear, what you actually hear, what you think you understand, what you want to understand, and what you really understand, there are 9 risks of misunderstanding each other, even with our significant others, even with the people who are closest to us. Because there's always a gap between what we think and what we want to say, what we really say, what we feel we can say, what we don't say, and what the other understands. Okay, so a number of suggestions just for interpersonal communication. And this is something that we use in our workshop with my company. 1, the less you speak, the more you say. So in a conversation, try to take the back seat. Let the other person say. And I know that in conversation, whenever someone is saying something, we always listen with half an ear. Why? Well, because in my mind, there's always a little voice that says, me, 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 me. I too have something intelligent to say about this. So it takes some self-control to tell that little voice, I know, shut up. Let the other person talk. There will be time for you to intervene, but listen fully, if you will. Don't always want to interject to make myself wittier or smarter or more intelligent or similar to the other person. Use positive active sentences. Meaning, don't say, for example, the lecture will be given, the workshop will be given. No, Gottschalk is going to give a lecture, if you will. Right? It clarifies conversation. I know that we are taught to write in scientific journal, we are taught to write with passive constructions. Data has been gathered, the data were analyzed, etc., so that the author disappears from the text. What I'm suggesting, especially in interpersonal conversation, it's like, no, use positive active sentences. This is what you're going to do, this is what I'm going to do. That way everybody's very clear as to what's going to happen. Be generous with positive reinforcement. Don't overdo it, because I think in the 80s and the 90s, there was a little crisis of overinflation of self-esteem, right? So don't overdo it, but don't be afraid of providing positive reinforcement to people. Be generous with compliments. Use I sentences, not you accusation and negative remarks. Meaning, instead of saying, for example, you're just being rude, right, which is an accusatory you sentences, use a sentence like, I'm feeling very hurt when you say that. Don't accuse the other, because as soon as we accuse the other, we're going to trigger negative reactions. Nobody likes to be accused. But if you want to criticize the other's communication style, but you place it on you, it's not an accusation. This is how I feel. When you speak to me in that way, then you're changing the dynamics of that particular exchange. Yeah, typically, if a person behaves in a problematic way, a person does not do his or her homework, a person is late for appointment, etc., don't tell the person, you stupid or you're a slacker, right? Criticize the behavior, not the person. Because the behavior one can change, but if you accuse the personality of a person is not going to change his or her personality for you, but the behavior, yes. Protect the dignity and respect the other, even if that person does not show you respect. I know it takes self-control. I know it's difficult, but even if a person does not show you respect, try to be bigger, try to be stronger, and to still respect the other and show the other person, respect the other person's dignity. When a person shows emotions or discusses emotions, you have to identify, validate, and legitimize the other person's emotions and your own, if you will. We tend to believe that we're purely rational people, that the way we communicate or what we do is purely motivated by reason and logic. But there's also many sociologists and psychologists who are going to say, no, we're just deluding ourselves. Most of our behavior is really motivated by emotions. Emotions are much more powerful in guiding our behavior than logic and reason. So we need to pay attention to emotions. If you have to set your limits because you're working with a person who's kind of pushing you, set your limits gently but firmly. Okay, individuals that you don't know, especially if you're going to work with undergraduate students, for example, some students will always try to push your boundaries. So you have to be very clear, gentle, but clear about what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. When interrupted, resume your sentence. Okay, the laws of conversation typically specifies that we should not interrupt each other, but as you know, in everyday conversation, people do interrupt each other. If we start screaming on top of each other, the conversation is going nowhere. So it's better to stop, let the other person continue, and then resume what you were going to say. If you're going to interrupt or ask a question or give an advice, apologize. So I'm sorry, but I just think that you should do it that way. Or I'm sorry, but you really think that this is the best way to go about what you're about to do. See, an apology doesn't cost you anything. It's free, but also it changes the dynamic of the conversation. Because simply by apologizing before you interrupt or before you make a suggestion, you're showing the other person's respect. If you don't understand a particular behavior, don't assume that you understand the motivation behind the behavior, because typically we're wrong, right? If there's a behavior that you find problematic and that you're not certain about where it comes from, don't assume that you know. Ask, what is the meaning of a particular behavior? If you have to deny someone something, be gradual when denying a particular favor or a particular request. Try to deny things without saying no. According to one of my company partner who is a neuropsychologist, no is probably the most traumatic and the first traumatic word that a child has heard. When that child for the first time is being refused something, is being denied something, is being told not to do something. So it is best if we can to deny something if we don't want to give it without saying the word no. Yes, this is also important. If you're going to give a positive criticism followed by a negative one, don't use that but. Meaning if I'm saying great job, but you forgot question number 2, right? So that but, if you will negate the great job, right? So it's better to say great job, wait a little while and say, hey, you forgot question number 2, but don't negate the positive by that but. Okay, it's important. Rely only on a positive a priori. And basically what that means is that, yes, sometimes people may behave strangely or people may seem rude or people may seem a little bit aggressive, but assume that people have good intentions. Don't come into interaction by believing that those people want to con me, those people want to scam me, those people want to lie to me. Assume good intention and see what happens. But it's better to go that way than the other way around. than start a communication, than start an interaction with a negative a priori, only to realize that you were wrong, that person means well. Because by then, there's too much negative information that has circulated. So assume the best. Be optimistic. If you were wrong, you'll find out soon enough. Adopt the learner role. Right? Adopt the learner role. You have a conversation with someone, even though you may be an expert on a particular topic, just pretend that you don't know. Just listen. See what the other person has to say. It's amazing how much people will tell you and how much you will learn from a person by just sitting back and letting the other person do the talking. Use silences and respect other people's silences. We're uncomfortable with silences in conversation. Do that exercise. Typically, we expect no more than 1.8 of a second between a question and an answer. So I say, hey, how you doing? I've barely finished to say the doing that you're already going to answer, fine, thanks. Right? So we don't like silences. So next time someone meets you, greets you, and say, how you doing? Just wait and see what happens. My bet is that you're going to increase that other person's anxiety by a few notches, but that's okay because we don't pay enough attention and we don't respect silences enough, our own and other people's silences. Align your language with your paralanguage. Okay, meaning if you're really happy to see someone, or if you want to soothe someone, if you want to comfort someone, make sure that your paralanguage projects, that your paralanguage projects what you want to say. Right? Align both. Attend to nonverbal cues, to the other person's nonverbal cues, because again, many nonverbal cues are produced unintentionally and unconsciously, but we can also learn a great deal about that other person by just watching the nonverbal cues. Keep visual contact with your interlocutor. And I know that this is different in different cultures, because I know that in some cultures, to gaze at someone who's your superior, for example, is a sign of disrespect. So in some societies, when you're listening to someone and that you need to show respect to that person, it would be impolite to gaze in that person's eyes. So depending on the culture, of course. But in this particular society, at this point, we expect that we maintain visual contact when we have a conversation with another person. Listen actively. Okay, listen actively, meaning provide feedback with your head, show that you're listening. When a person seems to say something important, lean forward to show that you're really paying attention. Listen actively. Okay, according to the French philosopher Simone Weil, she said, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, to give a person your full attention. And again, to give someone your full attention is something that you can only accomplish by communicating with your body, with your voice, with your eyes. Right? I mean, it doesn't do anybody any good to say, you get my full attention. You have to show that you have a person's full attention. Now, remember, I said that when I discussed a very short micro-sociological approach to communication. So I said that all communicative acts are motivated. Whether consciously or unconsciously, whenever we communicate, we always have an objective that we want to reach, whether we know about it or not. Now, William James, the founding father of American psychology, suggested that in human society, people validate one another in practical way in their personal qualities or capacities. I mean, for William James, what we all want, really, at bottom, is to be validated by the person with whom we're interacting, to be validated by the people who matter to us. They make us feel that we are a person that deserves attention, that deserves respect, that deserves esteem. Right? As he also said, the society may be termed human in the measure to which members validate one another. But it's an important lesson to remember, because again, how do you validate another person? Not by giving that person, yes, a diploma may help, if you will, but in everyday conversation, we can only validate another person by how we communicate with that person, right? And we can validate another person not just with our words, but also with our paralanguage, with our gaze, with our facial gesture, with our body movement, etc. Okay, so validation. So if I'm saying that every communicative act is motivated by an objective, inspired by social intelligence, we also use a particular psychological model, which is called the process communication model. I'm not going to bore you with the detail, but it's interesting. 60 Minutes just last week had a story on David Meyer, I think is his name. He's the owner of Shake Shack. Extremely successful, right? People wait for hours in order to get one of his burgers. And so there was a very interesting interview with Anderson Cooper, and Anderson Cooper was asking him, well, what explains your success? And I was really amazed because I was preparing this workshop and I saw that story. And he said, well, it's very simple. Everybody is walking with an invisible poster, which says, make me feel important. And he says, well, why are we so successful? Because I train my waiters into trying to pick up on every customer and to figure out how big is your poster, how big is the writing, how big are the letters, and how bright are the letters. Some people want to feel important. Different people want to feel important in different ways, right? But that still connects to the idea of being validated. Some people want to feel important because you're very solicitous. You come there 5 times and you ask them if the wine is all right, etc. Other people want to feel the way they want to be made feel important is when you leave them alone. And he says, if you can understand every person who comes to the restaurant, if you can pick up on that, how does that person want to be validated as important, then you've got a winner. You're going to winning business, if you will. And so the PCM model, basically, and you don't have to remember all this, but basically the PCM model, which is invented by a psychologist, suggests that basically every person can be grouped into 1 out of 6 personality types. There's no hierarchy, but those personality types have to do with our emotional needs. How do we want to feel validated? And once you understand which personality type a person belongs to, then according to that particular model, you can pretty much figure out how do you best communicate with that person. Some people will be moved, if you will, or you're going to get them to do what you want them to do because you use jokes. Other because you appeal to their sense of morality. Other because you appeal to their sense of duty. Other because you appeal to their sense of fun. Other because you appeal to their sense of aesthetics. But we all have different emotional needs. And if you can find out, those are all interactional styles, the psychological needs. And here, how do you best communicate? So there are different channels of communication for different personality types. And if you can understand that, then I think that you've achieved social intelligence. Because in the end, if you can figure out who are you, what are your emotional needs, what do you want, and how do I best communicate with you? What is the channel that will make you most responsive? Then you have, if you will, develop that social intelligence. All right. So let me now move a little bit to computer-mediated communication. And I'm going to start with a real story. So I was graduate coordinator in the Department of Sociology for 4 years. And one day, a student sends me, I've changed all the names, don't worry. But one day, a student sent me that email, which is sent by a professor. Right? And the professor writes that student, Jimmy, I will have to take care of it. And I don't care for your angry, pedantic, patronizing attitude. Our relationship as professor and graduate assistant is over. I will not allow you to waste another weekend of my life just because you can't follow instruction. I was graduate coordinator. The students in the panic sent me the email and said, what do I do? And so I said, okay, send me all the emails. I got to look at what happened. And because I've done that for a long time, so I kind of analyzed the email and I said, okay, this is the email that got misinterpreted. But by then it was too late. And because I was graduate coordinator, I had to tell Jimmy, I'm sorry, you can't, I mean, obviously you guys can't work together. So I have to find you another position and I need to find another assistant for Dr. Stanley, who no longer wants to work with Jimmy, only for an email, because of an email, a bad email, right? And so I know that we communicate increasingly through various modes, various computer-mediated modes, but especially in academia and especially in the businesses of the future, we will communicate most via email. Okay, according to some research, 65% of the population, and that's all, uses email. We process about 100 to 140 emails per day. 60% of all communication in organizations such as UNLV is via email. 70% of all emails are dispatched within 6 seconds. And right there, that tells us that we don't want emails. We want to get rid of them. Okay, I'm getting an email, and the first thing that I want to do is to get out of my inbox. We check our inbox about 30 to 40 times a day. And the average American worker who works in an organization such as this one spends about 23% of working day just processing email. So a fourth of our working time is just processing email, right? So we spend a tremendous amount of time communicating through email. So what are some of the challenges of email communication? Well, there are many, but I try to organize them as 4 different types of challenges. The first one is reduced information. And what I mean by this, and you all know this because you communicate via email. Remember I said we communicate through 10 channels of communication face-to-face? Well, here we only have 2. Language, which is written, and chronemics, meaning am I going to answer to you right away? I'm going to wait 2 weeks, etc. We use emoticons also increasingly, but you don't use it at UNLV necessarily with your instructor, etc. We use emoticons with our friends, but not necessarily in professional organizations. So think about it, from 10 channels of communication, we reduce to really 1, which is what we write. And that makes communication especially difficult, right? So we know that we are less able to communicate information about ourselves to others because we are mute. We can't use our paralanguage. On email, we are invisible. The other person can see our facial gesture, our body movement, etc. And we are literally out of touch. We can't touch the other, and we can't be touched by the other. At the same time, we are less able to obtain information from other people because we are deaf to their paralanguage. We are blind to their facial gestures and their body movements and their proxemics, etc. And we are completely uninformed about the context from which they write. But all those are important for us to interpret a message correctly. But we lack all that information because we only have 1 channel. We are blind, deaf, mute, out of touch, invisible, etc. Paradoxically, however, we systematically overestimate how well we communicate on email, and we systematically overestimate how correctly we interpret other people's email messages, right? So there is, for example, the neutrality effect, which is very interesting. Neutrality effect simply means that on email, when people send you congratulations, the person at the keyboard may be very excited about your accomplishment, but it's going to come out on email as much more neutral than the person intended. Right? So a very enthusiastic message will be decoded in a much more lukewarm tone. And at the same time, there is also the negativity effect, meaning that the expression of a mild irritation on email is going to be interpreted as an attack. Because we don't hear the other, we don't see the other. And because in the case where, in a situation where it's ambiguous, are you being sarcastic or are you going to be, should I interpret your message as this or are you being sarcastic? In the situation of ambiguity, we're going to go negative, typically. Yeah, this is a great research. Are you able to meet me? Right, look at how the R in the meet is written. And basically it's a research about students, such as yours, sending an informal email to their instructor saying, hey dude, can I come to your office hours? So it's a very informal email that students send their instructors. Systematically, what is going to happen is that the instructor who gets those kinds of email, 1, is going to like the student less, 2, is going to think less of the student's cognitive abilities, and 3, is more likely to deny even a simple request. Because you say, hey dude, can I come to your office hours? I'm going to say no. I'm there in my office anyway. It's my office hours, but you didn't treat me right. You didn't show me respect. And I thought when I read that article, I thought, well, it's probably old professors. Well, no. According to that research, it has nothing to do with age. Young professors are as likely to react in those 3 ways as older professors. So because I know that, I assume that many of you will communicate a lot with your instructors, try to think about that particular research. Always err on the side of courtesy and politeness. It's free. It doesn't cost you more money, but believe me, it's going to change your relationship with your instructor. We communicate more aggressively. We are perceived as more aggressive on email. We lie more on email and we feel more justified in lying. And also we feel less accountable when we communicate via email. So email is not the source of conflict, but it tends to become a much more dangerous tool once conflict has been initiated. And we all know that conflicts are much more likely to occur on email. So it's not email that causes the conflict. But once the conflict has started, trying to fix it one should try to fix it immediately, but trying to fix it via email is going to be very difficult. As Turkel, a psychologist at MIT who's analyzed computer-mediated communication, suggests that on email we often feel in a constant retaliatory mode against other. We are in a permanent state of mutually assured humiliation. And then there's also the issue of aggressive invisibility or emotional hit and run. We are on a discussion list, you say something, I send you an email which is very dismissive, but then I disappear. An emotional hit and run, and I'm leaving you to seethe with anger at the public humiliation. That is not going to disappear. Right? My mantra is what happens online does not stay online. Again, if I cause seething resentment because of an email that I send you, and it's going to get worse if it's public. Right? If I've humiliated you in public, on email, that's going to stay with us. It's going to become part of our relationship. Right? And so there's all that research on cyber incivility, cyber ostracism, cyber bullying, which is an increasing problem, as we know. Right? Because again, when we are on email, we are much more likely to project our own fears. We are more likely to be hostile, to engage in aggressive behavior, to be more disinhibited, right? To censor ourselves less when we are angry, to make unilateral decision. I don't want to talk with you anymore. Right? Off you go. To exclude and to lie. And we are much less likely to engage in all those skills, if you will, that enable conflict resolution. We're less able to understand how the other perceives us. We're less able to understand the other person's situation. We're less likely to have empathy for another person on email. We're less likely to attune to another person. We're less likely to employ our social intelligence, and that reduces our ability to reduce conflicts. This is just a chart on all the negative emotions that occur because of diminished feedback, diminished social cues, length of an email. Don't make your email too long because that takes time. And also don't require another person's attention too much because all these lead to negative outcomes in communication. And so again, so on email, if you will, we have higher risks of being uncivil to one another. But as research suggests, we are less aware of the fact that we've been uncivil or that the other may have seen our behavior as uncivil. So we are less aware of the effect of our behavior. We are less motivated to repair a bruised relationship because of a bad email. We're also less skilled to repair a relationship because of a bad email. And we are less successful when we try. And so this is why a suggestion is that if you think that your email has been misinterpreted, right, try to fix it immediately. Don't wait. It is better to say, hey, I'm really sorry if I sounded, if I sounded hostile or if I sounded impatient or snarky. It is better to prevent those kinds of fallouts, if you will, and having to fix them. Because having to fix them is going to take a lot of time and energy. So it's better to err on the side of being too cautious rather than not caring anymore. Because again, it will affect our relationship, it will affect the workplace. Right? Another challenge of computer-mediated communication is that it can be both synchronous and asynchronous. Typically, text messages are synchronous. I'm sending you a message right now and I'm expecting you to answer right now. But email can be synchronous or asynchronous. Right? So we can play with time when we receive emails. And some research also suggests, by the way, that the mere fact of opening your email is already increasing your breathing pattern and your heartbeat. Opening one's email already is associated with an increase in anxiety. Because every email that lands in our mailbox, if you will, sounds like an emergency, even it's not. Most emails we receive are not urgent, but they're there, they've appeared. It's like a phone call, and we feel that we have to answer them right away. So every email, and remember, we get about 100 to 140 a day. So every email triggers an increase in anxiety, even at those biological levels, such as heartbeat and breathing. As we discussed earlier, in a classroom, the mere presence of a cell phone is already affecting the cognitive performance of students, even if the phone is turned off. The mere presence of the communication device. Remember also that email is a request for work. If I'm sending you an email, I'm asking you to pay attention to me. What is work? Work is time and emotional and cognitive energy. If I'm sending you an email, I'm saying, stop what you're doing, pay attention to me, spend time reading what I want from you. That is work, right? An email is an intrusion. It's a demand for attention. It's a solicitation, right? This is why some researchers have spoken about the bliss of the zero inbox. That we feel so great when there's nothing in our inbox. There's no work waiting for us. And when you think about it, when we receive an email, we have to make all those decisions for one email. But I mean, first, of course, my decision will be filtered by my relationship with the person. But when I'm receiving an email, the first decision I need to make is important or not important. I'm going to go to the important first. If it's important, is it urgent or is it not urgent? If it is urgent, right, then I need to think now about when am I going to respond, from where am I going to respond, what am I going to respond, and to whom am I going to respond? Because maybe I'm going to respond to the sender, but maybe I may decide to respond to a group of people, right? And so if it's not urgent, important but not urgent, I need to make all those decisions. Do I keep it in my inbox? Do I trash it? Do I file it? And if I file it, in what location do I file it? Because I may have to retrieve it. And then if the message is unimportant, I still have to go through the decision tree. But all that is work, right? All that takes time. This is why, by the way, when I write on the paper, when I prepare a lecture, I always turn off my email program. Why? Because we know that if you engage in cognitive work, every interruption is going to cost you about 20 minutes of your time to get back to what you were thinking. So I also advise you to turn it off when you do work. Remember, the fact that technology works on demand does not mean that people do. So yes, it's Saturday at 2 a.m. and you just had a brilliant idea that you want to communicate to your instructor. Well, no, you have the technological ability to communicate your brilliant idea at 2 a.m., but role take with your instructor. Okay, it's not because you want to send it at 2 a.m. that the other person wants to receive it at 2 a.m. Okay, the fact that technology functions on demand does not mean that people do. So suggestion, role take with the person with whom you are communicating via email. But ask yourself, if I'm sending you an email, it means I want your attention. And before I do that, because it's work, I know that it's work and I know that you're getting 100 emails per day. So I need to ask myself, is my request for attention warranted? Is it timely? And if not, just postpone. Right? I tell my students, look, if you have a brilliant idea at Saturday, 2 a.m., I'm really glad. Send it on Monday morning. Nothing's going to happen to it. But at least it shows that you respect my time. Okay. Do you know where's my bottle? Oh, thanks, Sam. Oh. So what just happened when Sam gave me the bottle? I didn't. I mean, that was my mistake. I did, but my plan was not to thank him. Right? I've done that in other, it's a reflex. I always thank people. My plan was not to thank him. And the reason why I did that little exercise is very simple. When you email people and you ask them for some kind of service, right? Always thank them. Acknowledge that they've spent time and energy on your request. But a lot of people forget to do that. Because they say, hey, you know, I just asked you for a favor. I just asked you to send me a bibliography. You spend time preparing a bibliography for me. You send it to me, and it's like, okay, I got it. And I don't thank you. See, in everyday life, if I'm asking you for a favor, if I'm asking you, can you bring me my keys? Okay, do you have a light? Right? Of course, I'm going to say thank you, and you expect that I say thank you. And if I don't say thank you, you're going to feel that something is wrong. Well, the same emotions also exist when we ask and render each other services on email. So thank people, acknowledge that they've spent time, that they've spent energy on what you ask them to do. Another challenge is publicness. Because basically, when you think about it, email, the terminal, the cell phone, enables us to spontaneously broadcast every fleeting thought or emotion or desire to countless dispersed others, whenever, wherever. And that ability, as wonderful, by the way, that ability is unique in human history and psychology. There's never been a society where individuals had that kind of power to broadcast immediately whatever goes through my mind. It's brand new. And that ability gives rise to some challenges because so every spontaneous, fleeting, directed, and private thought, emotion, or desire will leave permanent traces in public, human, and digital memory. And the challenges is this. One, yes, the emotions that we feel are spontaneous and they're fleeting, but they will leave permanent traces, right? And yes, it's true that those ideas are fleeting. They seem non-material. It's just something I was thinking about, and I'm going to write it to you. It's fleeting. It's immaterial, but it will leave traces, which are physical and which can be retrieved. For example, all those cases are examples of individuals who did not sufficiently monitor how they were communicating via email or via cell phones, and they all get into a lot of trouble because they had passing thought, passing desire, passing emotion, passing demands, and they forgot. It's passing, it's just email, it doesn't seem real, but no. Everything was recorded, and then it was used against them. So suggestion, if you're emotionally upset, postpone, always postpone. Right, I mean, if someone has sent you a nasty email and you're really, really upset, just write your answer on Microsoft Word, whatever word processing program you use, keep it in your draft folder, go to sleep, and reread it the next day. Believe me, you're going to spare yourself a lot of heartache just by postponing. I know that it's cathartic. I know it's wonderful. You get a nasty email and you get just the right answer that is going to, be right on target, and it feels great. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Wait. It's always better to wait. Remember, okay, there's no undo, there's no delete on email. There's no cancel. And in human relationships either. Okay, what you do will be remembered. What you write will be remembered. And finally, the decontextualization is that when I write an email, the email is directed to a particular person, I'm in a particular context, right? But as we know, emails that we send can be completely decontextualized. They can be altered. They can be placed in a different context and reproduced millions of times, right? So be careful with this technological ability that surpasses our cognitive and our emotional skills. Because, again, I've been doing this for 9 years, workshops and working with professional groups, and everybody's got a story of being hurt or, fighting and of having terrible issues and terrible fights because of bad email. So again, those are just examples of some research that shows how computer-mediated communication affects us in real life. But this is the infamous Facebook experiment that they conducted on nearly 700,000 people. No social psychologist in history could conduct that kind of experiment. Basically, what they did is that when you open your Facebook, you all have Facebook? Yes? So when you open Facebook, you've got all the news by your friends, right? And you've got other things also, but you're looking at the news by your friends. So what Facebook did was to take 700,000 people, they just changed the sequence of the news. And they put all the bad news, the negative news first. They didn't invent any news from your friends, they just changed the sequence. And what they wanted to do was to see whether there would be an emotional contagion, meaning whether people who read negative news first will also start sending negative news, and they do. It's significant. And that's just with mild negative news. So just try to imagine what that emotional contagion can become if the emotion that is being spread around is not just the mild negative news, but if it's fear or panic, for example. So what we do on Facebook, for example, has real consequences because people then spread negative emotions, right? We know this is a study in our organization. The kind of cyber bullying or cyber incivility which is most used is refusing to answer to another person. Okay, this is about the most frequent behavior that people complain about. You send an email to someone and you don't get an answer, you feel ostracized. And there are few worse feelings in an organization than to be ostracized, to be silenced. Those are all the consequences of cyber incivility at the individual level, the collective level, the organizational level and the societal level. What we do online has real consequences at all levels of the social. Right? This is a great experiment, cyberball. It's again cyber ostracism. So it's a person sitting in front of a computer and playing a game of tossball, right? With two avatars, as you can see here. Those people don't exist, right? The two avatars is just a computer program. So at first, the person sits in front of the computer and sees that you're throwing me the ball, and I send it to him, and then you send it back to him, you send it back to me, right? So I'm just sitting here and I see you toss the ball to me back and forth. The computer program is programmed in such a way so that after a while, you just toss the ball back to each other, but not to me. So I feel ostracized from the game. And as you can see, those people are being wired up in terms of measuring their cortisol and adrenaline and all that, and it goes through the roof. Even though that the research subject does not know those other people is just a computer program, but the person feels ostracized. And you see all the reactions in that person's mind. Not only that, once that person who feels he or she has been ostracized is being measured on all those neural signs, that person is then brought to a group. And the group is making a particular decision. The person who feels that he or she has been ostracized is significantly more likely to go along with bad decisions that may have real consequences for organizations. But so again, what we do online has real consequences. This is a very recent research on cyberbullying, depression, and problematic alcohol consumption among women in college. So again, what happens online here for young women in college has real consequences for their alcohol consumption behavior and depressive tendencies. Yes? Oh, sorry. So suggestion, and I will finish with this. If you work with a student or with an instructor, or if you're the assistant of a person, negotiate email. Right? So I always tell my assistants, I will never bother you on weekends. Right? The weekend is your time, unless I'm being driven to the ER because I'm suffering a heart attack and we're giving an exam on Monday. I will not bother you. And I will not expect you to answer all my emails immediately. Okay, negotiate. It's very simple. That way there's no ambiguity. Negotiate how you want to communicate via email with the person you're working with or you're working for. Format the message to the medium. It's interesting because the same machine can be used to send both emails and text, but they're not the same, right? We use text very differently than we use emails, and we should adapt the particular communications we're going to send to the particular software that we're using. A text is not an email. Avoid ambiguity when you send email. Be very precise. The time you want to meet, the people that are involved, the events, the locations, the schedule, the objective, be as precise as you can so that there's no an endless exchange of email that people are, oh, but where is it again? Or when is it again, etc. Be very clear. You want to minimize the amount of email that circulates, right? Highlight important information, especially if it's a long email. Try to reduce the length of an email. If the email is longer than you anticipated, underline, bold, or put the important information in a different color. Shorter is always better. One topic per email, right? So if you want to send me an email about the exam, about your next assignment, and about something that happened 2 weeks ago, it's better. And if you want me to respond, if it's important, it's better to send 3 different emails so that every email has its own topic. So that when I look for it, I know what we're talking about. Show respect and courtesy. It's free. It doesn't cost you any more money, but it will go a long way in improving your relationship with the person with whom you're communicating. Assume the other's goodwill. I know sometimes messages are ambiguous. The brain is immediately going to go negative for self-protection. Well, try to control that. Try to assume that maybe you're wrong, that maybe the message is not negative. Show concern for the other. It's always a good idea. Anticipate the risks to self and others in various lines of action. Meaning, when you write an email, try to read it from the other person's perspective. Try to assess how else could my email be read? Could it be read in a negative way? And if so, what do I need to do in order to make sure that my email will not be read negatively? Role take with the other. Try to take the perspective of the other person reading your email. Read your email from his or her perspective. If you're not sure, guide their readings. Okay, if you think that the statement may sound sarcastic, just put in parentheses. I'm not being, I'm not being funny. I'm not being sarcastic, etc. Just make sure it's free, right? It doesn't cost more money, but it's going to eliminate problems that will take so much more to fix. Remember that silence, not responding to an email, is a communicative act. You've communicated when you're not answering. Acknowledge the others, communicative act. What I'm saying, if you give me a service, if you give me an answer for something that I've asked you, I need to acknowledge that you've done that for me. Okay, and try to resolve misunderstandings as soon as they occur. And that's it. Questions? I missed that one. I missed the thank you. Do you have any questions? I know it's a lot of information. It's all crystal clear. Took me years to understand all this. I think it's a generational thing. All right. Thanks. Well, if you have any question, you can always contact me. I'm in the source department. You have my email? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for attending. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Sorry?
No, I'm just saying that's really good.
It's a lot of information, but I went a little bit over time. I'm sorry about the thank you. I need to control myself. I've done it once and it worked perfectly in another workshop, but I guess it's ingrained. So,
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So thank
Thanks.
you so much.
I hope it's going to work on the because it's going to be online.
Yes, we're going to share it with them, and I think I'll give it to Valerie as well, so she
Okay.
can post it for the mentor
Okay.
program as well. So yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Okay.
So good. Okay,
All right.
let's see. We'll take.
Oh
this one
yes.
off.